Hey, so if you've been on this channel for a bit, you'd probably know by now that I'm a big fan of the X-Men. It's debatably my favorite franchise from Marvel Comics, period, only being rivaled in my appreciation by a short few. Though the past decade to 15 years of X-Men have been quite the roller coaster. There was a long moment in time where Marvel didn't want to do anything with the X-Men whatsoever. Now, this is because they didn't own the film rights of those characters, which they absolutely do now post 20th Century Fox buyout. I guess that's one good thing that came out of this monopoly. But this long stretch was incredibly odd because the X-Men were a massive chunk of the Marvel Universe and they just went ignored. They hadn't been seen in a while, they were gone. It didn't help that they also refused to do anything with the Fantastic Four either for similar reasons. Yet in the late 2010s, after about a decade of both Marvel and DC trying a bunch of risks and not all of them really paying off well, something has now shifted, and I'd say the big two have been putting out their best work in years for the past 7 to 8 years for now. And X-Men, well, X-Men came back in a whole new way. An entirely new era headed by Jonathan Hickman, one of the best comic writers of the past 20 years or so. Introducing so many new ideas and concepts to just obsess over. Krakoa, Orcus, Arakko, and so much more. The Krakoan era felt like Marvel's large apology letter to the fans for shafting the X-Men for so many years on end. To this day, that pace hasn't really changed. I'd say we're currently in an X-Men renaissance. An X-Menaissance? An X-Essence? I think you get what I mean. This whole thing was started and shepherded by Jonathan Hickman and his team, and this video isn't about the Krakoan era. Look, there's so much to love about that time of period in the X-Men comics, as well as some valid criticism, that I don't think I really have much to say about the whole thing because, well, a lot of people have already said it. However, I haven't seen much about the current comics. Right now, I believe the era we're in is called From the Ashes, or essentially the post-Krakoan era. And on paper, this should be the most rich era for character development, concepts, and more. Think about it. The mutants basically had their utopia, their ethno-state to some extent, and now it's all gone. They're left scrambled all across the world and are even more hated by the world now more than ever. It doesn't help that the Krakoan higher-ups did some really shady and even horrific things just to sustain their nation. All of mutant kind is now completely split on how they feel about Professor X. Thus, so far, I think many of the books from this era have been pretty solid. Though we do suffer a bit from the whole there's too many X books to read conundrum, but that's been an issue since like the 90s. For the most part, we've gotten some impactful stories, with the mutant side of Marvel mostly focusing on two series, X-Men, just X-Men, written by Jed MacKay, and Uncanny X-Men, written by Gail Simone. Both of these books are great, sometimes even better than the Krakoan era if I'm being honest with myself. But if I had to pick which I thought was the best from these central two, I'd absolutely go with Gail Simone's Uncanny X-Men. Which surprises me, because conceptually I thought I'd like Jed MacKay's X-Men far more. It's got Cyclops as a leader of essentially mutant rebels taking down the government operations, like a mutant Black Ops group, functioning sort of like Rick Remender's time on X-Force. I should reread that at some point. But no, instead I connected heavily with Gail Simone's X-Men book. Don't get me wrong, it helps that Rogue and Gambit are here, two characters who are easily some of my favorite X-Men as well. Some days I think I like Gambit more than Cyclops, and some days I think I like Rogue more than both of them. It's just like that for me, and probably for a lot of other X-Men fans as well. But Gail Simone X-Men is something I don't think we get from the X-Men series often. A series, while still dramatic and action-packed, is willing to slow down, take time with the characters, and honestly, it makes them feel like a family. I know some will probably cringe at that statement, but it's true. So come along with me as I talk about one of my favorite X-Men books in years, Gail Simone's Uncanny X-Men. Yo, want to read some of the single issues from this run of X-Men? Or maybe you just want to collect them in volumes? Or maybe you want some cool action figures of X-Men instead? Well, check out some of the products from Third Eye Comics down below. Or maybe you just want some X-Men t-shirts that'll make you feel nice and good inside. Well, we've also got some products linked below from 80stees.com. Pretty good stuff. Maybe you should buy some of the stuff below before the goblin hiding inside of my closet will attack us. This might be one of the smoothest introductions to any new X-Men book. So many other books just either drop you in the middle of the action, or they give you quite a bit of exposition to catch you up to where the mutants are now. This first arc does more of the former than the latter, but what I love here is that we get some character work out of it. Maybe some would hate a lot of the internal monologues in this book, some might call it a bit too old school, But I think it's great. Simone understands each character's voice so strongly. On one note, she really gets Rogue, which makes sense that she'd choose the character she's best at writing as the leader of the team, and also the central focus. Though I'd still say the book is mostly an ensemble, just mostly focusing on Rogue as the central character of it all. But this arc works so well because it seamlessly introduces us to so many new concepts like Grey Malkin Penitentiary, which has actually been remodeled out of the original X-Mansion, as well as showing us the reasons as to why this specific group of X-Men get back together. It has this sort of bittersweet feeling. The mutants have had some of their most precious iconography taken from them. They're in incredibly hard times, yet they could still all find a safe haven to get together in. This series also focuses pretty heavily on the mystical and mythical side of the X-Men. It's been there for years now, probably since New Mutants back in the day, but most writers focus on the very sci-fi elements of the series, or the grittier side of the series. But one of the strengths of the X-Men has always been that it could switch more or less into all sorts of different genres and tones. Like, characters like Wolverine fit the grittier, bloodier side of the mutant world. Then you'd have your magic characters like, well, Magic and Apocalypse can easily tap into this more otherworldly feeling of the X-Men universe. Plus, starting the series off with Gambit, Rogue, and Wolverine fighting a fucking dragon is one of the most badass things you can do. This is also where we get to see the gorgeous art by David Marquez. Genuinely, this is some of the best comic art I've seen in years. It feels effortless in the way that it's detailed and given life. He really gives every character their own sense of self, showing all these characters during intense action, down-to-earth fun, and even deep emotion. Most artists will usually be best at certain things over others, it's just naturally gonna happen, but Marquez seems to be a master of portraying all sorts of different things. If he could draw X-Men forever, I wouldn't even mind. He may be one of the best artists to work on the series ever. I mean that 120%. Simone also does this incredibly smart thing in the first issue by juxtaposing this great action to draw on the reader with a heartbreaking moment. A young mutant boy dying of cancer gets his Make-A-Wish to meet the X-Men. These are people that he sees as his heroes, his idols, people like him fighting to protect others in the right causes, and, well, quick spoilers here I guess, sorry about that, but he dies during their encounter. It genuinely rocks the team to their core, especially Rogue. After so many losses and countless deaths, this one was quick yet oddly personal. Though they get their chance to redeem themselves when 4 young mutant teen outcasts appear in their small hideaway in the bayou of New Orleans. Now, I know some would treat this plot point with a bit of trepidation, but X-Men has so many examples of great teen characters learning from the older X-Men members. Kitty Pryde is one of the most beloved characters in the whole series, and she was the prototype for all those to follow. We also got Jubilee, who's in this book, Armor, Glob, Kid Omega, literally all the new mutants either started as or are still young and up-and-coming X-Men. Thus, when I saw these 4, I was willing to accept it. And honestly, Simone writes these kids so well, you learn to love them real fast. Each and every single one of them are beautiful miracles in the world that can't help but bring a smile to my face. Ransom is the heart of the team, but also has a chip on his shoulder. Wolverine is the perfect mentor for him. Jitter is a sweet girl who's still sort of figuring out who she is, but is willing to take things head on. And Calico, man. Calico is such a sweet girl who's been treated so horribly by her family and doesn't even fully comprehend it yet. And my boy Death Dream? I thought he'd be the one I dislike the most, but man, he's so fun. Always spouting out random things he notices. He seems like an airhead, but I guess speaking to the dead on a frequent basis would do that. I'm also pretty sure he's meant to be autistic, but that's not for me to decide, I don't fully know. Of course, getting to the meat and potatoes, this arc is more or less about the past. Charles Xavier's past to be specific, because even when he's gone, he has such an impact that cannot be ignored. Yet, we never get to see Charles, just the echoes of his actions and his past spilling out and affecting our X-Men who just want some damn peace. Literally being haunted by the ghost of a past lover. Or is she a hag? Well, whatever she is, she's terrifying, and she's also incredibly petty, making sure that she hurts the mutants she targets and not just killing them. Look, when it gets to the point where Wolverine's getting screwed up pretty bad, you know it's a bad sign. Yeah, we have this back and forth, the first few issues showing Charles' past with this woman, this Sarah Gaunt, and how she came to know him. It was just a small thing to Charles, but her finding out he's a mutant changed some things. Something happened in the past that Charles did or didn't do that caused her to become this mutant-killing demon. It also doesn't help that the anti-mutant force at Grey Malkin Prison is using her to kill these mutants too, but that's pretty typical for X-Men villains, let's be honest. This entire arc is maybe one of the best intros I've seen to a comic in a while, showing us all the unique character relationships, establishing some deeper themes, and seeing future character growth. It's phenomenal. It's both fresh, but also classic in all the right ways. It really feels like Simone is a big fan of the classic era of Claremont's X-Men, and is sort of translating a lot of those themes, character work, and style of that classic run and making it modern. Look, I don't want to say much more because if you're an X-Men fan, you should at least read this first arc. But the next arc is sort of doing something a bit, well, I'd say interesting, but X-Men books do this pretty frequently. So this is a crossover event, which those can be really annoying to keep up with. And while I do love X-Men, I will admit a lot of the times it can be frustrating when you have to read like 5 different books minimum to understand a larger event that's going on. Luckily, this arc is only a crossover between the 2 main X-Men books, Gail Simone's Uncanny X-Men and Jed MacKay's X-Men. Personally, I'm okay with this. It's only 2 books you gotta read, they make it clear which order you're supposed to read it in, and they both have X-Men in the titles. So I don't gotta read like X-Force, X-Statix, Exiles, and so on to understand what's being said. I bet you didn't expect that X-Statix reference, huh? Yeah, I know ball. Here we get a short 4-issue story. Well, okay, technically 2 for only counting the Uncanny X-Men book, but it's 4 altogether. We get the typical things that predictably happen in a crossover story like this. A small fight breaks out, they eventually team up, and so on. You know the drill. The most interesting piece behind all of this, though, is that this arc sort of switches up halfway through and becomes an argument about if they should even release Charles Xavier from this prison. Interestingly, Rogue says yes because she still believes in Charles' dream, whereas Cyclops is absolutely against it. He's tired of being pressured and controlled by Xavier, even if it's unintentionally. And really, his viewpoint isn't completely unfounded. Charles has done a lot of shady things, even before the Krakoan era. He isn't exactly the squeaky clean peacekeeper that we see in other media. Thus, the ideological argument between the two really does hold some emotional weight. My only real complaint is that I wish it happened a bit later in Gail Simone's time on the series. That way we can really get a stronger feel of the X-Men without Xavier, or at least this group of X-Men without Xavier. But I also understand there's a lot of editor mandates from higher up and all that, and whatever, that sucks, but what can you do about it, right? All in all, it's not a bad arc by any means. In fact, it sets up interesting points and does some pretty cool stuff. We get to see a psychic battle between Charles and another psychic, which is something I wish we got to see more often. And now Charles is pretty much out and about, essentially a hated man by the world and hated by a lot of the mutant community. Hopefully, this gets tackled in a way that doesn't derail anything interesting going on in this book, but we'll just have to see.
Release the hounds!
Here we get a small arc that focuses on the kids as well as people who are meant to be their mentor. And if I may, I really love the dynamics going on here. Like, Ransom being put with Wolverine is a unique flip on the Wolverine mentor trope. Usually, Logan is placed with a happy-go-lucky or more optimistic person. Just look at how he was placed with Kitty Pryde and Jubilee. So in here, placing Ransom, a kid with a chip on his shoulder that has a lot of great reasons to lash out at the world, it just makes sense to put him in Logan. Logan has been where Ransom is 100-fold, so we could speak from experience about what not to do. We also get some moments hinting at Calico and Jitter forming a cute crush on each other. The dancing in the barn is just a cute moment, man. It also feels like a real and natural relationship, like there's still a bit of that lovey-dovey puppy love type feeling, but that's who those two are. Then we get Jubilee paired up with Deathstream, and this is also a great choice, basically pairing up the brightest and most optimistic member of the group with one who's probably has the darkest backstory. Basically pairing up the brightest and most optimistic adult of the group with the kid who probably has the darkest backstory. So the moment of her showing him her powers and making him gasp in wonder is such a beautiful moment. It shows that while Deathstream may be obsessed with morbid things and dark topics, he can still enjoy the nice things too. Or maybe he's never had the chance to enjoy the nicer things in life. What I love about this arc is that it does focus a lot on the new kids though, showing how they work together as a team while not pulling the main X-Men out of the spotlight either. It's showing how the influences of their mentors and those raising them make them stronger together. We also get to see that those at Grey Malkin are working with some new Sentinel prototypes. However, these aren't your typical Sentinels. Instead, they're made by cyber-modifying the hell out of living dogs, which is disturbing. But I also find it interesting because it is sort of bringing in a lot of the best elements from how Hickman portrayed the Sentinels, these beings that would eventually forcibly make humans become cyborgs and modified. Of course, Simone doesn't go all in on the transhumanism versus evolution themes like Jonathan Hickman does, but I'm glad she brings it back because I do think that's the future of the Sentinels. Plus, there's a little moment here explaining as to why they don't need to make the giant mecha Sentinels anymore. Basically saying we don't need to make a message and make it loud. We need to be quiet and sweep it all under the rug. I'm paraphrasing, but that's more or less what I got from it. It shows how, in the modern age, a lot of bigotry has gotten a lot quieter, but is still pretty malicious. Like, the government or other big entities won't just outright act hateful, especially if they could profit off of you. But they will absolutely make a group a quote-unquote problem if they see you as one. I mean, propaganda against trans folks is the ultimate example of this. This is also where David Marquez stops being the main artist for a little bit. Okay, technically he wasn't the artist for issue 7 either, but that was like a one-time artist who I don't think comes back, so I'm not going to mention either. But for these 2 issues, and I think only for these 2, the lead artist is Andre Bresson, and he has a style that's also great to look at. I wouldn't say it has the flow and ease of Marquez before him, but Bresson has this more gritty and rough art style. It's honestly a nice style that has this sort of punkish vibe to it. Kinda reminds me a bit of how Tatsuki Fujimoto and Gege Akutami have this more jagged, expressionistic art style that is captivating to look at. But of course, he only stays on for 2 issues, and periodically other artists will come onto the book. It kinda is just one of those comic things you gotta get used to. So I can't really say much of a statement on a stylistic look other than how it looks in the series. I don't know if I've seen him on any other books. Luckily, Marquez does stay on as a cover artist, and he does some great covers. Hopefully, he'll come back as the main artist soon, but that's not always an option. Overall, though, a really great arc that defines the new cast pretty well.
Oh boy!
Remember how I said I hoped no major events would derail the story in this book? Welp, monkey's paw, I guess. Wait, that's not how a monkey's paw works. What's the right metaphor here? Look, it doesn't matter. Either way, the Marvel editorial basically gave me the bird and said, I'm gonna make an obnoxiously long event anyway. Look, I don't hate events in comics. In fact, DCKO was an event that I thought was really fun, and Marvel pretty much invented event books with things like Contest of Champions and Secret War. But my issue was that modern comics just love doing them with such large bloat that it removes the fun. Like, for this event alone, I had to read 6 other books to get the full narrative. And that doesn't include the issue of Uncanny X-Men that ties to it. I know this was literally set up like 2 arcs ago, but that doesn't mean the entire universe has to be wrapped around one event. I get it's technically realistic that the mutant community would be affected by Charles doing his plan, but on a story writing front, it just forces all these series to stop in their tracks and interact with one another, even if there's no logical crossover to be had on a writing or thematic level. It's not all bad. There's things I like about this event. I like that the Shi'ar come back as a big player. We haven't seen them interact with the X-Men in a while, and that's a massive part of the X-Men world in general. I like that different people and teams have different reactions to whatever Charles is doing. That's not bad. But this arc just feels so bloated. I honestly feel like if this whole event was maybe like 2 or 3 issues shorter, we would have had a leaner story with much more impactful emotional moments. Instead, it feels like we meander for a bit and even introduce some things that just don't get brought back. Like, when Miss Marvel from the NYX team decides to help Charles Xavier, we don't see her again? So why the fuck would you do that? I also learned that halfway through reading this arc that it's an event within an event. Apparently, this is just a spin-off of another event at the time, the One World Under Doom arc. I mean, come on man, don't you think this is a bit absurd? On the other hand, it's nice to see some iconic and some not as iconic X-Men characters reappear. Like Mojo coming back was super interesting, taking the seat of Krakoa. We really haven't had much on that from what I've read, so I'm assuming that's for another group of characters to worry about or something larger in the future. I'm now learning that this in fact has not gone anywhere whatsoever. That sucks. It's also cool to see Maggot come back. I think he has one of the most unique powers of all the X-Men. And seeing the battle between Scott's X-Men and Storm was interesting. Plus the psychic battle between Kid Omega and Xavier was fascinating, showing off Xavier's darker side that he tries to hide. Yet the event just kind of halts to a stop when X-Factor comes in and turns comedic, which I guess can work, but with the dour tone of this arc so far, I don't think we really need levity at the moment. Also, have you noticed I haven't mentioned anything about Simone's X-Men yet? Yeah, that's because they're barely involved in the plot until like the last 2 issues. You know, the characters of the X-Men? One of the main teams of the X-Men? No, instead fucking X-Factor pulls up and slows down the plot to a crawl. Though, I really do enjoy the ending. This idea that Charles chooses to leave the planet to leave everyone in peace is one of the most bittersweet moments in any X-Men series. And seeing that despite Scott not seeing anything with Xavier's dream anymore, he still cries because that's his father figure. That's a really genuine moment. I just wish that there wasn't so much that goes nowhere or is just filler, because there's something genuinely beautiful here. It just needed a different time and space to form properly. But after this, we get some character-focused stories as one-offs, which is for the best after whatever the hell X-Manhunt wanted to be. Here we look into Gambit's past, and I'd say we start to focus on Gambit more on from here on out. Rogue doesn't take second fiddle, but they more so take on a duo protagonist role. We also get introduced to this badass new character, the Vig, who's basically this mafioso crocodile-looking mutant guy, They haven't really done much with him yet, but he seems to be someone interesting for the future. And from here too, though for a little while, I don't know why I didn't mention this earlier, but Nightcrawler is forming this super sweet relationship with a single mother after saving her child. Honestly, it looks like things are going well for the X-Men, and we have some more things to explore in the next arc. This is a 4-issue arc, and thank God it's not a crossover. Instead here, we do a couple of things. One, we compare and contrast the mutants of today with the mutants of the past, and I don't mean like the mutants of the 1980s or the 1990s, I mean like the 1800s. You know, when the main means of cross-country transportation was a steam train. We jump back and forth between the story of Henrietta, a black woman who's also a mutant, in the 1800s, or as they call them, mutates. This is contrasted with the present as Gambit's sort of succumbing to a magical item they got from the dragon they fought all the way back in issue 1, and the kids are pulled into this strange place in the swamp. If I'm being real, this may be the best arc of the series so far, focusing on generational trauma and hatred that can bury itself deep down in a culture, and how the youngest can acknowledge it and learn to grow past it, which is expertly examined through the lens of Henrietta in the past. How we see how the older mutants use the secret language of symbols to communicate with each other, primarily using the X sign to mean welcome to mutants or mutants in general. That is a genius touch to bring the X symbol all the way around, and why it matters so much as the main symbol of mutant kind. It's like this ghostly thing in a culture that changes shape and forms to meet the new generation, yet is always present in some way, shape, or form. Insert the George Lucas line, it's like poetry, it rhymes. Of course, we still have some fun as a large part of the story is Gambit riding a dragon in his underwear in the Savage Lands, which I'll admit is a much better attempt at adding levity to a story with dark subject matter than the previous one, though that's not Simone's fault. She probably wasn't the one writing those particular issues of X-Man Hunt. I also want to add, this is when Marquez comes back as the main artist, and I'm so glad he did for this particular arc, since I think his style adds a sense of gravity to some of the darker history surrounding it. The kids are so well developed in this arc, they feel like a genuine group of friends, all refusing to have Deathdream go into this dark place alone. Also, Man-Thing is here. He's always been a fun, underrated character that doesn't get used much, so making a story with a more gothic horror tone with him in it is just a smart thing to do. He acts as sort of this bastion of this underground tomb of mutants the kids have to go and investigate. This arc is so rich with themes. The entity inside this tomb wants to keep one of the children there to be her replacement, to torture the souls locked in here of those who have betrayed mutant loved ones. Yet I like that everyone shows up to stop this. Everyone is here as the adults and the kids all fight as equals to stop this loop of pain and suffering. In a sense, there's always going to be that person in any targeted group who will always be like, don't forget what they did to us. And while I do think we should absolutely learn our history and learn the real truth of it as to not repeat it, there's also an extent of not letting it define you either. Like, from my personal experiences, I'm physically disabled, and they used to kill people like me at birth, or lock me in attics, or even place people like me in labs to be experimented on till we died. But I also understand that we can move on from that, to let go of it to some extent. Understanding where to fight it, and also understanding that at some point, those old ways will naturally die because people in general are both smarter and dumber than we think. I know that sounds contradictory, but life itself is a contradiction at times. So we'll just have to learn to accept it. And we can see this sort of mindset in the entity Shuvarak, that is the overseer of this sort of underworld. The one that works like a devil for all those who betrayed mutant lovers, friends, and family. But what's the point in all of this? The kids realize pretty quickly that this accomplishes nothing. It's just demonizing for demonizing's sake. We can see that the world is changing too outside of this dark place. The mayor of New Orleans practically celebrates the X-Men and mutant kind. Now, I will admit it does have a hint of gentrification, but it seems to come from a genuine place. Starting a festival that's meant to help mutant relations, even starting to build landmarks in celebration to the X-Men. It goes to show that the world has changed a lot, but not at all in some ways. So yeah, this arc might be the best of the series so far, no notes. And here again, we start to see a lot of looser stories that are either slice of life or are clearly setting up for future events. But one of the best stories for this small amount of time is Murder Me Mutina, an in-universe movie about a mutant serial killer, a sort of slasher film that plays on the fear and tropes of mutant kind on the average person. And it feels like Simone is in my brain or something, because she's literally showing an example of how the media and those who make it can use things like film, video games, and TV to create and reinforce negative stereotypes of people. I love that Jitter goes to see the movie with the other kids, despite the fact they know it's clearly exploitation filmmaking at its worst, and it makes her feel terrible inside. She doesn't fully know how to deal with the fact that the movie was made to intentionally make her feel lesser, and for others to fear her, making Mutina a new slur in the large catalog of mutant slurs. What's ironic is that Mutina is a mutant herself. There's clearly some form of internalized hatred informing her every move. I mean, come on, look at her. She's the most emo-ass edgelord girl I've seen this side of Discord. And of course, this all happens before the festival Friendship Fest, created to make better mutant relations between people. It's one of the rare times we get to see the mutants have anything nice. People welcoming the X-Men with open arms, and Nightcrawler even gets to have a sweet date with the woman he's been seeing. Her name's Mackenzie, by the way. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. It's great to see all this character work and appreciation being shown. This book knows exactly when to slow down and give us these nice stories of the week or slice of life moments for all the kids. Sure, Simone lays the groundwork for potential stories, but she understands that the X-Men is beloved for having this human, dramatic quality to it. It clearly shows in the 2 issues where Wolverine and Ransom go to Brazil. You see, Ransom is Brazilian, and he was treated as a bastard black sheep of his rich family due to a multitude of reasons, but being a mutant was absolutely one of them. In fact, the mask he wears is literally from a group of men who held him ransom and his father refused to pay. That whole event's still affecting him since. And that's where he even gets his mutant name from. It's so satisfying for Logan to teach Ransom how to properly use that rage to benefit himself and others, and Logan just straight up punches his piece of shit dad in the face. So there's that too. But after these 4 issues of really fun one-off stories, we get into a 3-part arc. This is just a fun action arc pitting classic monsters as well as Morbius and Elsa Bloodstone against the X-Men, thus pushing the mystical focus of this particular book even further. It's a fun little story with great character work as usual. The defining moment, of course, is when Gambit has this sort of intervention moment with the team. The magic item he's been using has basically been corrupting him. The dragon said it would, and he refused to listen. Thus, Gambit's not been acting like himself and hiding some of the darker effects from the team. After a bout of desperate anger, he comes to terms that he's an addict. Always has been. He's just been trading different addictions around when it suits him. Which honestly doesn't really feel like much of a retcon. I don't remember Gambit ever being a heavy smoker or a drinker, but I'd also believe it. After all, he probably had the shadiest upbringing in comparison to the rest of the people here. Overall though, this is a pretty fun arc. It doesn't have a lot of substance, but that's okay because it's probably just the calm before the storm. So yeah, that's all of Uncanny X-Men so far. They actually just started a new arc, but that's not done yet, so I don't think I should discuss it as of yet. I wanted to make this video because, 1, I like this book a ton, but also to show that there's a lot of great stuff to be reading right now. I genuinely think American superhero comics are in a far better place now than where they were about a decade ago. Of course, we still have some of the classic problems that have kind of been plaguing the medium since the 90s and 2000s, like the obsessive use of event books, but overall I'd say this is a great book to jump in for new fans and old fans alike. And while I'm at it, what's some of your favorite recent comics? Don't gotta be superheroes. I've heard Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees is actually really good, and The Wicked and Divine is also pretty solid from what I've heard. Let me know in the comments below. But as of now, I'm reading Gail Simone's X-Men, as well as a ton of other stuff in my backlog. Oh, Kagurabachi too. That is gas. Oh, and I heard the new Superman run by Williamson's really solid. I've been meaning to check that out. And there's a little mini-series that JMS has been writing. And that's all I gotta talk about on that. Like I said already, this book's really cool. You should check it out. And hey, while you're at it, if you want, you don't gotta, you can buy and check out some of the stuff with the links below. I tagged the products here and there, if you will. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you really enjoy Gail Simone's X-Men because I do. And with all that being said, I'll see you next time.